Hi, this is Dr. Anna Baranowsky, and I am the host of the Trauma Recovery Show. I'm a psychologist, and I have been working with trauma survivors for the past 15 years. I run the Traumatology Institute, and I talk about trauma every single day in my practice. We've developed a website called What is PTSD, and it's just filled with strategies and different things for you to think about in terms of your post-traumatic growth and recovery, and I am dedicated to this work. I'm excited to talk to you today about what's happening with you after trauma. If you're struggling with a traumatic event and you have strong feelings, they may not go away without help. And I want to talk to you about this issue and help you kind of make sense of what might be going on. Something that happened to you last week, last month, last year, or even 25 years ago. I want to talk to you about what I'm seeing and hearing every single day in my practice. And I want to talk to you about what's happening with you. Trauma might be causing you more problems today than you could even imagine. I did an interesting search a while ago, and I found that every single month globally, over 365,000 people were searching on Google for the term, what is PTSD? Or do I have trauma? So that tells us a lot of people are thinking about this issue and trying to figure out what's happening with them. And there are a lot of people who are struggling. If you're not feeling better after trauma, there are a lot of things that I want you to consider. First, I want you to recognize that time is actually important. In the few first days and weeks after a traumatic event, or exposure to even a series of events, you might feel really upset, really anxious. You might experience disrupted sleep, a sense of tearfulness, confusion, fear, anger, or even suicidal or homicidal or violent feelings. And for many, these feelings, they do go away, but they don't go away for everybody. And I want you to understand that depending on the severity of the event and also who you are as an individual, between 17 to 27% of people actually develop post-traumatic stress disorder. And this can be life-altering and riveting. The 30-day milestone is important because if you're not feeling better after 30 days, I want you to recognize that something may be going on that you may need some guidance or help with, or even some education about. I want to talk to you about Sheila, who was a young medical doctor. She witnessed a terrible, fatal car accident. She was the very first person on the scene of the crash, and she was driving on the highway at the time. She witnessed this accident, and she stopped her car, pulled over, walked over to the driver, and the individual who was in the driver's seat was very severely injured but still alive. Now, this individual did die, and Sheila was holding the driver's hand when he died. Sheila was trying to support the driver. You know, she always described herself as a very strong woman, confident, capable, dedicated to her career, really wanting to help other people. And she couldn't believe how badly this event impacted her. And she couldn't get over it. It just kept playing over and over again in her mind. Now, this is not such an unusual thing because when we are exposed to something that's truly terrible, sometimes we just can't get it out of our mind easily. And Sheila was bothered by what she saw and what she experienced. She was bothered at work. She was troubled when she was driving. She didn't want to see her friends or her fiancé. She couldn't go to sleep because the minute she lay down to go to sleep, she was flooded with these images and memories of this event. And she felt like a failure and not the compassionate, caring professional that she always saw herself, that she always strived to be. So this was devastating her, and she was struggling. Now, Sheila waited for over 2 years before she really came to terms with the fact that she was struggling. She came to terms with the fact and accepted that she actually needed to deal with this because she was feeling worse since the accident. She wasn't getting better. It just wasn't going away. And, you know, a lot of people have this idea that they can experience something terrible and it's just going to go away. And, you know, I want you to know that that's not always the case, and I want you to understand that it's okay if you're like Sheila and you've experienced something and it isn't going away for you. Have you experienced something you can't get out of your head? Are you suffering months and even years after a serious life event? Maybe it was a workplace trauma. Maybe you were injured on the job. Maybe you experienced an accident yourself or witnessed something terrible. You know, you might have even had a serious illness, and you might be afraid of getting it back again. Maybe you'd experienced some kind of assault, some kind of a violent incident that keeps replaying over and over for you, making you feel vulnerable and unsafe. Or maybe you have something that goes back to much earlier in your life, something that happened in your childhood, maybe even severe neglect or bullying. Some people experience military trauma, and that can be devastating as well. Sometimes people don't recognize that what happens during a deployment feels very different when you get home. Other people experience trauma when they're working in emergency services, and this is not an unusual thing. And I work with a lot of military and paramilitary members, and they are often highly dedicated individuals. And then when they feel that the impact of their trauma is something they're not going to get over, it feels awful to them. And of course, there might be some kind of a domestic abuse or other act of violence that you're struggling with. I just want you to know that so many of these things can be the normal response to exposure to extreme events. What you might not know is you might not realize that being involved in a fight at a nightclub is still causing you problems today. We don't always recognize the roots or the source of a problem, and so we can have all these terrible feelings and symptoms and not make the connection with what happened weeks and months and years ago. And then it starts getting really confusing because we just start to feel out of control in our lives and somehow like we're not doing well. So I want you to start making the connection to the roots of your trauma and understand that if there is a real connection there, that you can find those roots and you can start working them through and recovering. You might have become used to the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and you might be living with something that's keeping you from fully enjoying your life today. Now, I'm going to say that there are 4 things I want you to think about. These are intrusion, avoidance, arousal, and negative mood and perception. And those are the core symptoms. There's a lot of things that go along with each of these, and I'm going to go into much more detail about it. But to start with, I want you to just recognize that there are 4 things that are absolutely at the core and very, very common things that people tell me about when they're struggling after trauma. And I'm going to go into much more detail about that as we go forward. The other thing that may happen is the people around you may actually start tiptoeing around you. Your relationships might change quite a bit after experiencing a traumatic event. And, you know, if you ask the people in your life and you have a good relationship with them, or at least an honest relationship with them, they may be able to tell you things that may surprise you quite a bit. And I would encourage you, if you feel that you've got supportive people around you, to ask them if they notice that anything's changed in your personality since the traumatic event. And then your job becomes really just trying to hear what they say and understand that knowledge is power. And this can be really the start of your own recovery. And I want you to really take that on as well. So the other thing that might be happening is this change may be destroying your relationships at work, at school, at home, and everywhere. And I want you to know that this is something that you can grow beyond. Trauma can change your personality so that you no longer recognize yourself or even like your own behavior. But you can do things about this that can make a huge, huge difference. Now remember, we have the opportunity to talk about these from your perspective. Have you experienced trauma? Are you struggling today? Have something to talk about? Have a question? Call 1-888-454-3378. 1-888-454-3378. This is Dr. Anna Baranowsky, and I am with you today talking about trauma and recovery, and I want you to take on, and we are focusing on post-traumatic growth and recovery. Remember, I said before, I want to talk a little bit more about intrusion, avoidance, arousal, and negative beliefs and perceptions, and we have Tim on the line right now. Hi, Tim. What's happening with you?
Hi, good morning. I'm a retired firefighter paramedic.
Thank you for calling.
I did it for 31 years, and I've been retired now for 4 years. But the thing is out of the blue, I get hit with nightmares, and Jim, and like I have one that's reoccurring. It was a car accident years ago where an entire family was trapped and eventually died in a wreck. But in my dream or nightmare, when I go, it's my family that's in there. It's not the people that were originally in there. And so, I've tried, like therapy, and I take, an SSRI and Wellbutrin, and the only thing that kind of helps is a peer support, but it has to be other firefighters. You know what I mean? I can't get it out of normal people.
Right. Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. Now, you know what? You're raising a very, very important issue. First of all, your dreams are coming to the surface after you're finished with your duty, right? Like you're out of your career for a while, and now you're having these terrible intrusive nightmares. And you can see that the nightmares ignite to a terrible place of vulnerability, like it's your own family. So I totally get how upsetting that must be, Tim. Are you waking up experiencing a cold sweat? Are the nightmares waking you up in a state of startle?
Startle, yeah, not a cold sweat, but startle. And what I don't get is it's 4 years, since I retired. Why now do I get the nightmares now?
Yeah, and actually that makes perfect sense as well, because there are a number of things that are happening. One is that when you are literally in the war zone, when you're in the middle of your career and you're actually doing the fight, the symptoms don't necessarily start at that point, because it's kind of like being in the war zone. And your body is on full alarm every single day. It's actually when you step away from the career and you actually have reflection time. This is why for a lot of people, when they go into retirement from these kinds of careers, they can actually find themselves struggling for a period of time until they learn some strategies to manage all of this. It's not an unusual thing. But I will say that there are a few things that will probably help you better manage these symptoms. And I'm going to give you a couple of things right now. First, what you want to be able to do is learn some strategies for harnessing calm. You ever notice when you wake up what's happening with your heart rate and breathing? Do you know what it is?
It's racing. Yeah, it's racing.
It's racing. So you right away can recognize that you're having a physiological reaction, as if something dangerous is happening right now when we know it's not, right? Nothing happening. This is a dream, right? But what your body is actually doing is it is replaying danger as if it's happening right now. And what we need to do is actually extinguish the danger response, and we do that by retraining our bodies. And so if you're able to learn some very stabilizing breath training exercises, you will find that if you practice that daily and then you apply it when you wake up from, with that startling, disturbing, intrusive dream, what will happen over time is you start to extinguish the dream content, okay? Because if you wake up and you're in a state of startle and you're upset and you have no way to settle it down, it just becomes embedded as more and more disturbing. It probably makes you not want to go to sleep. Or are you finding that happening for you, Tim?
It takes a while to fall asleep, and I don't want to use a sleep aid either, you know. It's just, you know, I want to deal with it naturally, I guess.
And that's fine. And so if you're going to go the natural route, what I would really encourage you to do, and you've identified one of the core symptoms, and one of your core symptoms is you can recognize that your heart rate is elevated and that your breathing is rapid. And that tells us that you're in this fight or flight mode, that your body is telling you you're in danger, and you need to actually be training your body to settle down. The other piece, and I said I was going to give you two, the second one is I want you to change the ending, because you're going into the dream, and remember, this is your dream content, nobody else's. You own it. It belongs to you. So I want you to actually deliberately change the ending. Now, this will take some practice as well, but I don't want you to give up on yourself. I want you to actually go into the dream. When you wake up, I want you to just very clearly recognize you had a dream, it was a bad dream, and I want you to say something new to yourself. So, for example, you gave me a very, very clear example of a dream in which it was your family, your own family, in this terrible car crash. Well, I want you to go right back into the dream, and I want you to change the ending. I want it to be something that you create that is a better thing. What would you say? How would you change the ending so it felt better for you?
I'd save them, of course.
Save them. Well, then I want you to go right in there in your dream, and I want you to save them. And I want you to actually use your imagination, because you know your mind is an unbelievably powerful resource, and I want you to actually use it. And give yourself a new ending. And I want every time that you have a bad dream, I don't want you to just go back to sleep and try to, you know, muscle through it. I want you to actually own that you had the bad dream, understand what the content was, change the ending, and work with deep, slow inhalations and exhalations as you're ending that dream with a new content. I hope that you'll try that, Tim.
Yeah, stay in bed, because a lot of times I wind up just pacing for a while.
Well, you know what? Listen, one of the things that you can do is go to whatisptsd.com/find-calm and sign up for 10 free videos. They are all about stabilization, and a few of them are about deep breathing themselves, and that may actually start you on a good new path forward, and then use this new strategy for your sleep as well. You have a great day, Tim, and thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you, ma'am.
This is Dr. Anna Baranowsky with the Trauma Recovery Show, and Tim just helped us do an amazing understanding of this symptom that I was trying to explain to you, which is all about intrusion. So remember, we're going to continue with this conversation about post-traumatic growth and recovery. Call 1-888-454-3378. And for other people who want to get more information about finding or harnessing calm themselves, you could visit www.whatisptsd.com/find-calm. And remember, call 1-888-454-3378. This is Dr. Anna Baranowsky, Trauma Recovery Show, and I am interested in talking to you about post-traumatic growth and recovery, whatever your story is. This is Dr. Anna Baranowsky, the host of the Trauma Recovery Show. Thank you so much for joining us. I am really excited because I know that we have Robert Palaciano on the line, and he is the author of From Anger to Enlightenment, this is his own survivor's story, and he is going to talk to us about what he experienced after a terrible event. His story is one of absolute terror in being shot 3 times when he was working as a manager in a bank, and these shots led him to 77 harrowing days in the hospital while he was recovering from life-saving operations and experiencing what I understand to be excruciating physical and emotional suffering that lasted for so long beyond the hospital bed. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Dr. Baranowsky. Thank you for having me on today. It's certainly my pleasure.
Oh, I'm very delighted to have you here, and thank you so much for sharing your story, not only with myself, but with everybody who can get an understanding of what it's like to go through such a difficult thing and then actually kind of transform as a result of it. Like it's a very important story that you're sharing with people. I wonder if you'd be willing to tell us what was the most disturbing piece of all of this for you?
You know, I was shot as a manager. I died. I journeyed to heaven. I came back, you know, and dying was actually the easy part. It was what happens after. It was the pain, but not just the physical pain. It was the anger. The man who shot me was never seen again, and he escaped, and he was never caught. And it was that anguish and that anger that it hurts survivors, especially when those people are never, you know, meant to, they're never caught and pay for what they have done. And, you know, we have...
You do write a lot about anger in your book. This was like one of the most pivotal pieces that you kept on going back to over and over again. I wonder if you could help me to understand why you got stuck with anger, because I work with trauma survivors every single day in my practice, so people get stuck in different places, and the place that was really, really hard, the place of deep pain for you was a place of anger. Did you get a sense of why that was the big piece for you, why that held you so deeply?
You know, he was never caught, so there were so many questions for me. Why did he shoot me? Why did he shoot my 2 coworkers? And, you know, when you have the physical pain that I had and the waking flashbacks and nightmares for years, it changes who you are. These symptoms of post-traumatic stress change who you are. And it was turning me into, you know, it was turning me into him. And I had all this anger because my life was being turned upside down, and I had guilt because I was the guy in charge of 2 other people who were also shot. And it took me many years to realize how to get rid of my anger and how to relinquish my guilt.
I always find it very interesting, Robert, you know, when people talk to me about any given emotion. In your case, it's anger, and it makes me really think about how we're wired as human beings. You know, we experience things in our lives, and we are wired to get out of harm's way, to get out of danger. And when there's no way to get out of a danger situation, like I read your book, and I understand that the situation, that acute moment where you were facing the gunman, and he chose to shoot you, you had no choice. There was no out. There was no way to get away.
Exactly.
And what we tend to do in those moments is we search for answers, for some way to own the situation so that we don't feel so vulnerable and so helpless in those moments, because I'm not any different than you, Robert. I mean, I could have faced the same thing just as easily in another setting. I mean, we're all in the same boat here, right? Trauma is the great human equalizer.
Exactly.
Now, I think about, you know, the saber-toothed tiger at the watering hole. This may seem off topic to you, but give me a moment and you'll see where I'm going with it. We're wired with this mechanism to tell ourselves stories that remind ourselves of trauma so that we can know the cues and get out of harm's way really quickly. So
Sure.
for many people that experience trauma, they don't let go of the story. They just keep replaying it at the highest and most acute level, because on some level we tell ourselves, if I just keep repeating it, I'll know it'll never happen to me again.
It's a defense mechanism.
Of course. And so the anger, in your case, feels to me like that kind of the writing on the wall. I'm going to repeat this story because part of that story, as long as I keep that part alive, then I will stay alive. And the minute we let it go, like you were very brave to find your own mechanism to release the anger and let yourself come back to life. Like
Right.
that was a life-saving choice you made for yourself.
Exactly. You know, I think, and I talk a lot to people who are survivors, not victims. And we believe, or I used to believe, and I don't believe anymore, is that our anger makes us stronger, and it somehow insulates us, and it protects us. And that this is not going to happen again because we have this anger, but in fact it changes us and it hurts us. Until I realized I had to get rid of the anger, and I found my own path and my own steps to do that, that it ultimately forgave the man who shot me in my heart, and realized how easy it was to do that, and how it now helps me to get rid of my anger, and forgiving myself for anything that I thought I did or I didn't do that got my other coworkers shot, and I was able to alleviate my own guilt. And those two things were tremendous, but the forgiveness for me, and it was like staring me in the face the whole time. But why would I forgive a guy who did this? But it was so easy to do it, and it really helped me alleviate my anger.
I love the fact that you recognize there's this link between the anger you held for yourself and the anger you held for this perpetrator, and that by, in your case, forgiving the perpetrator, you were able to learn how to deeply forgive yourself. And I just find that there's such a huge hook for so many people in that we bear the burden of the guilt, and largely, unless we're able to forgive ourselves of that burden,
Exactly.
we can't recover well.
Right.
What an amazing thing that you were able to forgive both yourself and this individual, and just really release it so that it didn't continue to cause a burden for everybody around you. I want to make a note of the fact that about 10 or 12 years after the original shooting, you'd been working for a number of years. You miraculously came back, went back to work, worked for many years at the bank, and 10, 12 years later, you had this huge setback. Did that setback occur because of something specific that occurred in your life? Was there a trigger? Because you don't mention that in the book. You don't explain that.
No, nobody physically put a gun to my head. I wasn't involved in a robbery. It wasn't that kind of a trigger. I just believe that there was so many different things happening in my life at that time that it just, the straw that broke the camel's back. There was just maybe too much stress in my life, and that was the trigger. It wasn't one thing. Maybe it was a lot of things. I went back to work, and it looked like I was fine for so many years, but, I was always on the edge. I was always looking for this guy everywhere I went. I still had the reflex from the noises, loud noises, and I was always hypervigilant looking for him. And while I worked, I was right on the edge of, losing it the whole time. And then no one event happened, but some combination of things happened, and it just crushed me like grinded me into a powder. And the trauma in my head came back tenfold. And this is where I've been for the past 10 or so years, until I realized that there are things that I know that my doctors needed to know. They're now, I'm helping the doctors who treat me to learn more about
Robert,
trauma.
Stay tuned. We're going to wrap up. This is Dr. Anna Baranowsky with the Trauma Recovery Show. This is Robert Palaciano that we're speaking with from Anger to Enlightenment, and you can call us anytime at 1-888-454-3378. Stay tuned. We're going to talk more about what happened with Robert and what it was, this no small task of recovery, and how you can get over anger as well as you move through to your own healing and get to a new place. This is Dr. Anna Baranowsky, and this is the Trauma Recovery Show. I work with trauma survivors every single day in my practice. This is Lifestyle Talk Radio, and I want to talk to you about post-traumatic growth and recovery. Remember, you can listen to more of this show after on a podcast. If you haven't caught the full show yet, go to Lifestyle Talk Radio and listen to the full show. I want to talk a little bit about something that happened last week. I am located in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and our capital here is Ottawa, and we had a terrible shooting, killing a soldier at a war memorial, and this is such an unfortunate event. In this case, the soldier had a gun, Captain Nathan Cirillo. He was only 24 years old, and his gun was not loaded, and so he wasn't even able to defend himself. This is an awful situation that leads us to change our approach to dealing with acts of terrorism. I have to tell you that many of my clients came in during the week, last week and this week, and a lot of them were experiencing what I would call a triggering response, in which an event occurs in the media, something a lot of people are talking about, and as a result, it reignites their own trauma history. And this is particularly true for individuals who have a military or paramilitary, policing, emergency service type of work, because it becomes very personal. And so this triggering response can be happening to you when you watch the news or you listen to certain things and feel a sense of personal vulnerability and fear. This is not an unusual thing. Remember, we were talking to Robert Palaciano about his experiences with trauma. And now his experiences are very, very noteworthy, and everything that he had to say helps us to better understand these four things that I was talking about before: these symptoms of intrusion, avoidance, arousal, and negative beliefs and perceptions. And I have to say that something very powerful about our minds, the way our minds work. And, if we start moving into a place where we're using anger as a mechanism of keeping ourselves safe, the more we think in that angry way, the more we're likely to use anger or whatever emotion we're using over and over again. If you tell yourself that you're not safe, if you go to an ATM machine, and every time you go to an ATM machine you're telling yourself you're not safe, then that belief becomes stronger and stronger, even if you've gone to the ATM machine hundreds and thousands of times and nothing has ever happened. It can be for you a powerful trigger. The good thing about this is that we have the capacity to retrain our brains. This is no small task. It takes daily discipline and a strong will to redirect our focus consistently enough that the old belief and pattern becomes weaker over time. Now, that's pretty powerful, but it is absolutely something that could happen for all of us. This retraining towards the positive, the challenging of old negative beliefs and reinforcing safety is a huge mechanism for growth and change. So let's see if we can talk to Robert again and hear a little bit more about how he was able to pull himself out of anger and whether he is still aware of other things that are unresolved today. Robert, how are you doing with your conversation, sharing all of this with us today?
Every day is, every day is a new day, and but I think that each time I talk about it, it helps me in some small way.
Wonderful. That is so amazing. You know what? What you just said is absolutely essential, because you recognize that every day is a new day for not only potentially having difficult feelings, but also challenging and changing those feelings over time. Do you notice that you do certain things inside of yourself to reclaim yourself and pull yourself out of anger and in a different direction? Are you deliberate about this?
My whole life is deliberate. Years ago, I was the A-type. I'm probably still an A-type, but I planned months and years out. And now I simply plan the next day. Just one day I wake up and focus on the challenges ahead of me. And I find that focusing day to day is a much better way to live than trying to live out in the future.
Is there anything that you still struggle with today?
Sure, I struggle. Most days I shake, and the startle response is still huge, and unable to do a lot of things most of the time. I just try to focus on what I can do on that particular day. A lot of the trauma issues still disable me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, have you done any in-depth trauma therapist with somebody who's really skilled at trauma therapy, specifically?
Yes, I've been to many trauma therapists. I've done exposure therapy, EMDR, psychoanalysis, regression. I've done a lot of that.
Did anything help more than anything else?
I think all of those things helped a little bit. The one thing that really hurt me was also the nightmares, because the nightmares, they provide sleep deprivation, and that comes with a whole other set of issues, and the emotional distress and with the adrenaline during the nightmare really hurts me, and probably hurts other survivors when we wake up, and it kills our day.
Wow.
But
okay.
I did get a...
Robert, thank you so much. We are actually going to wrap up. I am so delighted that you joined us. You have helped so many people just by sharing your story today. I just want to mention again, Robert brought up the very same issue that our previous caller, Tim, brought up about dreams and how they can impact you. And I'm going to invite Robert to go down the same path and see if he could try stabilization exercises with our video challenge. And this is Dr. Anna Baranowsky. Remember, you can listen to the full podcast at Lifestyle Radio. And thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Anna Baranowsky, Trauma Recovery Show. Have a great day.
The opinions you hear on Lifestyle Talk Radio are those of the hosts, callers, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect those of this station, Lifestyle Talk Radio, its management, or advertisers. The information on Lifestyle Talk Radio does not constitute a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any product or service. If you have any questions about Lifestyle Talk Radio, contact us at 817-274-1609 or at lifestyletalkradio.com.